Welcome to welcome to SDHist AmRevCon. I'm Andrew Bucholtz with SDHist, and I'm here interviewing Roger Miller. You know Roger from his work with Revolution Games as a publisher, but he's also a noted designer, and we're particularly going to talk about his Washington's Crossing game, first published in 2012. So Roger, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Just to start with, how did you get started with game design and publishing? What led you into this field?
My family is a big bunch of game players, and I am a third generation game designer. Both my grandfather and my father tried it before me.
Oh, very cool. And how young were you when you started wanting to follow in their footsteps?
So I got my first war game for my 15th birthday in 1975.
Nice. Yeah.
And I instantly realized that I could pull them apart, figure out how they were put together.
Mm-hmm.
So by 1977, 2 years later, I was designing games, and I submitted my first game to SBI in 1980, which was rejected, as it was by everybody else at the time also.
Oh, wow.
And so that led me on the path, if no one was going to publish my game, that I would have to learn how to be a publisher.
Mm.
And so in 1992, I published my first game.
Very cool. Yeah, and from there, it's gone on to quite the company, to quite the design career. But let's talk about designing Washington's Crossing in particular. What got you interested in that?
Well, I've always been interested in the American Revolution. So first thing, that was a good historical subject for me, and I had a lot of background in it. But the second reason why Washington's Crossing really exists is because it was an under-designed area. So we as a new company deliberately chose to go somewhere where there wasn't a lot of competition. And it's an operational American Revolution game, which at that time, the only other one was Clash of Arms, Year of the Hangman. So we were literally talking about an area where there was no competition. And the theory was that as a new company, going into an area with no competition would be an advantage.
Sure.
By the way, that theory is completely wrong. It is much better to do the 1000th Gettysburg game or Battle of the Bulge game than to go where no one has gone before. But I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
At that moment. So Washington's Crossing was a combination of my interest and a marketing attempt to carve something out that hadn't been done.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean, and on the marketing side too, I mean, it really seems like such a great place to dive into your company's first American Revolution game. I mean, this is such a famous moment. I love the cover where you've got the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, and so it really seems like, even if that's not what you're doing generally, that this would be a logical place to start. Did you feel that way too? Like this was the place where you would touch the American Revolution?
Well, even though it didn't sell fast or particularly well, one of the things it did was it did establish a reputation for the art, the components, and the seriousness of the design. So if nothing else, it helped from, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to do from the perspective of selling the most games, but in terms of setting your reputation up, it did good things for Revolution Games.
Absolutely. And you talked about how this came out of some previous interest of your own. What sort of research did you do for this, and how much had you already done versus what did you do after you decided to do a game on it?
I probably knew about half of what I needed to know. Obviously, for this game, the primary source is the book by the same name, Washington's Crossing, which won a Pulitzer Prize. So, I mean, it's a serious book. But there's quite a few books on the Trenton-Princeton campaign.
Mm-hmm.
There's also original documents, some diaries. I'm not, I'd say I know probably 75% of what a serious historian would know about the campaign. And that's more than enough to generate a really good game. I mean, some obscure little points I don't know, but and some just eluded me, like the degree of forestation of New Jersey at that point in history. Oh, you cannot imagine the esoteric debates about that. It's no one really knows well, and there's a lot of debate. So the map is probably the most speculative part of it. And trying to decide which roads to show, which ones to not show. That's the one that's the hardest to research. The order of battle is actually, for a battle of this period, surprisingly well known on both sides. What actually happened in the battles is actually also pretty well documented.
For sure.
Even the weather. We have two primary sources for weather that have survived on daily records of several times a day from nearby, from Philadelphia. So even the weather we really know pretty well on the campaign. So I like research. I think research is one of the fun parts of game design. But and I actually like research in this period or up through the Civil War, because more modern research, there's so much of it, so much information has survived, that there's always something you're going to miss.
Right.
Well, back here, you talk to somebody else and say, oh yeah, I've read Ewald's diary or Plummer's diary. There's like 5 diaries that exist.
Right.
Go, okay, you know those sources. We're all talking the same thing. And when something new comes up that somebody discovers, it's a huge, exciting thing in the field. But like for World War II, I'd never be certain I had even half the information for
a
battle. So anyway.
No, that makes sense for sure. So something with the game itself, that sequence of play is pretty interesting. What led you to that?
Well, it's a very old-fashioned sequence of play in that it's I go, you go. And a lot of people have asked me about that, saying, oh, but in modern days, shouldn't it be card-driven game or chip pull or whatever else? And I'm explaining to people that it was an I go, you go situation. The mechanic is directly related to the history of the campaign. Washington led off with a surprise attack, and from then on, the British were a step behind the entire campaign, and they were reacting the entire campaign. And so I realized that the randomization of cards or chip pulls would completely, even though they were more modern mechanisms, they'd be completely inappropriate. The appropriate mechanism was to allow the Americans to go first each turn and drive the action that way. And that's asymmetrical between the two sides, and that shows their advantage. And so that was a very deliberate choice, even though it's a dated mechanism. I think it fits the situation a lot better.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes some sense. And speaking of game design moments coming from the history, a thing that really draws a lot of comment with this game is the river crossings and what you set up for the uncertainty of the river crossings. Why did you do that way?
Well, there were 2 reasons on that. One, I felt that the river crossing was the single most important thing in the game. And most people think about the river crossing like there was one river crossing. That wasn't Washington's plan. There were multiple river crossings up and down the river planned as part of this offensive. And the other river crossings failed or farther down the river. One of them got a couple hundred people across and decided it was such a mess that they called it off and withdrew those people. And the fact that the river crossings weren't guaranteed, most games show river crossings as, oh, it's so many movement points. Or if there's a zone of control, you can't cross there. It's just a cut and dried situation. And I realized that games haven't really shown that river crossings actually are quite variable and quite uncertain. And this is true also for more modern river crossings. All games have a lot of stuff to concentrate on and where you're going to put your rules and emphasis. And I said, well, this will be interesting because nobody has really dug into river crossings and shown what were the variables in the river crossing? What if there were multiple places to cross? How did the general decide? So for example, historically, Washington crossed well upriver from Trenton because he was extremely concerned that the British would discover the plan prematurely. There was a much better crossing closer to Trenton that wouldn't have required the extensive force march that almost killed the American troops, did kill some of them, and left his troops very fatigued getting there. But he felt it was too close to the British. Now, in reality, the couple weeks before the crossing, the American militia had been doing such a good job of raiding and pushing on the British that they had abandoned even going out patrolling that crossing.
Oh, wow.
And he could have crossed at that location. And that's the kind of thing that the game, and most players playing the game, cross at that location. But if it fails or only partially succeeds, and there's a rookie mistake playing the game is to depend on one location, then you're stuck with, I've only got part of my army across the river and not enough of my army across the river, and what do I do? So it takes players usually a couple times of playing the river crossing just by itself and really thinking about it before they come up with a plan of crossing the river in several places and being flexible enough, if it doesn't work in one place, how the overall plan is going to be reconfigured. And this is, of course, much more like real military operations are planned, whether it's D-Day or any offensive, rather than obvious other points, like movement is variable in the game, like great campaigns of the American Civil War. It's, you're going to roll a dice and you're going to get movement points, so you can't guarantee where you're going to finish your march. And so if you are counting on getting a march that requires a high number of movement points, it's risky because you might not roll the adequate movement points to get to your objective. And that's based on historical research, again, of average march distances per day, and also studying how often they fouled up. They planned, or their orders were to get to a certain location that day, and they didn't make it. And so that's, again, how the research directly impacts the rule. The variable movement is not because I wanted a neat mechanism that I liked from great campaigns of the American Civil War. It's because, especially in a winter campaign of this period, it was pretty variable. And the British are slower in the game. And the British were not slower just because they were slower. The British are slower because they wanted more predictability.
Mm-hmm.
And so their army didn't push it as hard because that way they could be certain when they ordered their troops from A to B that they were going to be at the end of the day in B. And so the Americans were a little looser and a little more willing to have it malfunction, and then we'll deal with it and make a new plan. And so that shows up in the game in the difference of the Americans roll better, and the Americans can move more troops at night, which the British were reluctant to do. Occasionally they did it, but the Americans were much more willing to take long marches at night. They were much more willing to fatigue their troops to a higher level than the British were. And so all these lead to asymmetrical advantages for the Americans that show up in the game.
Absolutely. So let's see if I can make this work here. I've got a copy of a file of the map that I pulled up off BGG. Where on that is the crossing that you were talking about of where Washington could have crossed and didn't?
Going from left to right, you'll see the Delaware River is about the middle of the board on the left-hand side, going over toward the right, and then it takes a big bend down toward Philadelphia. Historically, the Americans crossed all the way over the red arrow that's like 4 or 5 hexes in from the left-hand edge.
Yeah, I see where you're talking about, yeah.
They crossed out there. And I think that is. Can you blow it up a little bit in that area?
Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure if I can make it a bigger.
It's really hard for me to...
No, I know it's a little. Let's see.
Or if you can see it better than me.
There, actually, I think there's a thing where I can. Does that help at all? Making that just. It may not help because that's. It doesn't seem to. Sorry, I don't know that I've got the capability on here, but I'm with my level of zoom on my computer, I can see what you're talking about. Absolutely, there's a crossing 5 hexes in.
Actually, I think it's the second one.
Okay.
So now that I've got a little better view. So it's the second one in. The far left, they didn't use. The second one in is where they used. And then there's one that's like 3 hexes farther over. That's the one I'm suggesting they should have used.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah, cool.
And then you'll see there's 2 more arrows right next to Trenton on They tried to cross behind Trenton, the 4th arrow over.
Yep.
And the plan was that they would cross there, and that creek there is called the Ossenpink. And the plan was that the Americans would go across, turn right, and they would press the British against that creek, and the other Americans will have crossed behind them. And it will be an envelopment in that area right there.
Yeah.
But the crossing right behind Trenton failed. The river ice was worse there, and it was running into each other and created an ice jam of ice flows. And it wasn't solid enough to walk across, and it wasn't capable of handling boats. So the river conditions just failed there. They rolled poorly on their dice, and that one failed. And then farther down, go around the bend and way down the road, so to speak, where there's 2 little red arrows, maybe about 15 hexes down, they cross there also.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely.
And that one, they got a few hundred across. Cadwalader, the American commander, goes, "This is too impossible." He decided on his own that Washington's crossing must have failed if it looks like mine. He pulled his guys back. Now, his failure, however, leads to really important historical events. because then he gets word after the Battle of Trenton that Washington actually has crossed the river and it's been successful.
Mm-hmm.
So Cadwalader goes, oh, I guess it is possible. And he sends his guys across a couple of days later.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at this point, Washington's already gone back across the Delaware.
Right.
So they're not coordinated. They're not coordinated with one another.
Yeah.
But Cadwalader crosses the Delaware down here now on that side.
Yeah.
And he sends a message back to Washington. There were British troops all the way down in this right lower corner.
Okay. Yep.
Hessians and the Black Watch. And he tells them, hey, they're evacuating this area. They're running away.
Mm-hmm.
And Washington reevaluates the whole campaign at that point. And that's when the Princeton campaign is born, because Washington's original plan was to raid, drop back across the river.
Yeah.
Now he's looking at a different situation where he realizes how well he's done and what the British's response is. So he sends a messenger back to Cadwalader and says, okay, hold on, you stay on that side of the river and I'm going to recross the river and we'll link up. And the second river crossing is actually slower and worse than the first river crossing. But the British aren't contesting it. The British are up here in the northern part of the map, I don't know, all the way at the top.
Yeah.
Where the blue water is, that's New York's harbor. And next to Amboy there, that one hex is the tip of Staten Island. That's up there. So they're bringing troops from New York and their northern New York garrisons. And they're trying to put together a field army under Cornwallis, which is taking them a few days. And then they're going to march down the middle of the board through Princeton and on to Trenton. And so both sides are now concentrating and setting up a more traditional engagement. Well, Washington hears that Cornwallis is coming, and he doesn't want to fight the British in a set piece battle.
Right.
So that's at this point of the war, after getting burned by that in the New York campaign. And so he sets up a series of delaying actions down the main road, which are not focused on very much in history, but were actually pretty important. They're big level skirmishers. The British really struggled with it. He falls back through Trenton behind that creek there. And there's a battle that's either called Second Trenton or the Battle of the Assunpink, either one, where they do stand and fight against the British. And it's almost completely ignored. Not exactly certain why, but it's a very successful defensive stand. The British take pretty good losses on total between those two battles. They take 600 to 800 losses, which by American Revolution terms is a pretty good thing. And so this is what the game is designed to handle. The game system is designed to handle not just the big battles, but the smaller skirmishes, and even with the raid mechanism, the tiny little actions where 10, 20, or 30 men. And that's why the game markers, I looked at like Zucker's Napoleonic games or great campaigns, and I go, the American Revolution is tiny actions. I can't have 1,000-man strength point losses, or even 100 men would lose much of the flavor. Unfortunately, it comes with a high price of record keeping, either on paper or on charts.
Yeah.
So, in general, Washington's Crossing it's a very detailed simulation. I think its research is really good. Its mechanics line up with what happened, but it's more overhead. It's not a simplified view of of that campaign, which also in marketing terms may not have been the smartest move. But that's why people ask me, like, why does it have such small things? Because I want to be able to show, hey, they fought at Morristown and there was 150 guys on one side and 200 on the other that
Right.
fought. And they took 30 and 20 casualties each.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's pretty interesting to me about this. Well, first off, just for we do have a fair bit of people watching. If you have any questions for Roger, please leave them in the YouTube comments, and we can feature them right in here on chat and get them to address them while we're live. But one thing that comes to mind for me, Roger, so I think it's really interesting that you have this operational game, and you can see that even from the map scale. I mean, going from New York all the way down to Philadelphia, but then you've got those strength points representing 10 guys. How did you fuse those two sort of scales of, like, you're looking at this grand distance, but not a lot of people?
Well, one of the things, fortunately, was the battles were very distinct, meaning that it's not continuous. A lot of days they just marched, and so because the action it's in basically a country that's very little, not heavily populated like modern. So they're small armies fighting on a mostly empty map. And that works well for operational games. So right there, it's an ideal operational system. The map scale is just over a mile a hex. It's the same as great campaigns of the American Civil War. That's an accident, but it's 1.14 miles per hex. That's also a really good scale for operations. So the map scale, the army size, and that's when you're choosing, however you're designing a game, a battle game, whatever level of game you have to have the unit scale, the map scale, and the time scale all line up. And that's one of the first things I do in a design, is to make certain that works, whether I'm designer or developer. So I knew as operational level, it was going to be, 1 day turns, or like in this game, in Washington's Crossing, it's four turns per day. But if you run your troops all the time, they won't rest, and the fatigue mechanism will quickly stop you. The practical level is you can do 2 things a day. And the rest of the time you better be resting. And so that was, chosen right from the beginning.
For sure. That makes sense. So something else to touch on with this. You hit on one area earlier of they could have maybe used a different crossing, but it seems like from this there are a lot of ways this could maybe have gone differently with a few different decisions from commanders on one side or the other. Is there anything else that stands out to you there that you've seen from people playing this game, of people behaving ahistorically and maybe it producing interesting results?
Well, yeah. One of the questions was victory conditions obviously influence gamers' values and what they decide to do. And the game gives rewards in terms of victory points for winning battles and for controlling territory, very conventionally in that sense. But I play almost every year a game at Consim World in Tempe. So if anybody is going to be there in Tempe this year, I'll be playing on Wednesday with Daniel Berger, designer of Hands in the Sea.
Great designer. I love Hands in the Sea, yeah.
And a really sharp player. And he really loves Washington's Crossing. And so we play most years.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so one of the games, as the British, I managed to sneak out a victory. All the black dots are towns on the board. And at the end of the game, even though I lost more of the battles, I had garrisoned much of New Jersey.
Right. Okay.
And he was going, "Oh, that's frustrating." And I go, "Well, Daniel, one of the British objectives is they're trying to control the countryside to bring one of the colonies back to the crown. And so this requires the physical occupation, sort of as we needed it in the Vietnam War. And so if you get overly focused on chasing Cornwallis around, let's say in the main British army, and you ignore the fact that the British are also interested in controlling the population, you can lose the game. Alternatively, I've seen in an interesting way, so you're focused on the terrain, let's say, as the Americans more this time. In the lower right, there's a Hessian army, as I said, and some British troops. Well, they don't necessarily have to run like they did historically. Sure. They could choose to maintain an independent presence in that corner of the board. And they could even choose to go for Philadelphia.
Right.
And so the Americans have to go, well, if they stay down there, what do we do about that? And how do we control that? There's at least 3 or 4 viable strategies for each side. It's not unlimited. The Americans can try a blitzkrieg crossing at Trenton and going north as fast as they can for New Jersey, northern New Jersey. The British are mobilizing their army, as I said, historically, and they're coming on as reinforcements. You try to bum rush them and defeat them in detail by going north quickly. That's another American strategy, and it's fun to play. As for both sides, it ups the excitement level really quick. I've seen other Americans go across the river and turn right and try to capture the Hessian and Scottish troops that are in this lower right corner. And you try to exterminate them to the man, which there's like 2,500 troops down there. That's like 10% of all the troops in British North America at that time. It's a serious, and because it would have been very devastating to do that, especially since a lot of them were hired troops. It would have made it really difficult to continue to recruit that way. Although the Hessian king was not particularly squeamish about his losses. Some of the other German princes were not quite as callous, and most people think we call them all Hessians, but
it's not entirely.
They're not. And some of the later guys, like the 71st, I think, is from Waldeck, and there's Anhalt-Dessau, and there's Brunswickers, and a lot of other people represented in this campaign. And that kind of red shaded line across the middle, that's a trigger line that if the Americans go north of that line, the British start to panic. It's one thing to raid Trenton and retreat across the board. It's another thing if they go north of the red line, that signals to the British, oh, they're serious. This is a real campaign. This is not a raid. And it speeds up the British reaction and the British reinforcements. So there's a self-correcting mechanism in the game to show if you really were that aggressive with Washington, the British would start reacting a little less complacently than they did historically.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I think one really cool thing here from how you're talking about this, so we talked a little bit about the small scale of individual strength points, and this is obviously an operational game, but I think it's cool that you're working in things from the tactical and strategic levels, because I mean, you've got these real small strength points, so that really zooms in some ways. But then also on the strategic level, like you have things like those considerations of how do the British react if you do this, or what you were talking about with sort of a hearts and minds impact of controlling those different towns. And a lot of AmRev things like Washington's War, Liberty or Death, they're more strategic level focused, have a lot of focus on that. But it's cool to see that in an operational game. So was that on your mind when you were designing this of, oh, well, maybe these elements aren't usually in an operational, but they make sense here?
So yes, it's a conscious thing of design. And so I would tell if I was coaching a designer, if it wasn't my own design, your focus can be on river crossings. Your focus can be on command structure, whatever it is. But that doesn't mean you reduce the other elements necessarily to zero.
Yeah.
Those will just maybe receive more simplified design, more streamlined design, something that gets you. I tell people, if you can get 80% of what you want with a simpler rule, go for it. Don't. If it's going to take 4 extra pages to get you to 95% of simulation, I'll maybe grant you that as 1 point in the game. If it's your thesis thing, go for it. Spend me the extra pages. But if we're talking about, so I'll give you an example in the supply system. The activation points, the command points, I don't even remember what I called them in the game. They're basically represent supplies. And you spend those supplies on these tracks around the board edge to move your troops. And they're the limit. They're what ultimately limits you from, along with fatigue, from doing too much. And then you can roll for one general on each side to activate by his own. Now, we'll contrast that with, say, Kevin Zucker's system. He would have you old school if you were playing, his games, OSG games from the 1970s, Napoleon at Bay or something. You'd have gone around the board and rolled for every general to have a chance of activating. I didn't want to do that. I felt that was too cumbersome. So I adjusted the points. So that you spend more points and it's in your control, and then you have one random choice, and that moves it along faster. I got my command system to where I want 80% of the accuracy, and I lost some of the die rolling and mechanics there. And so that's what I'm really aiming for. And if it's something like you were talking about, the hearts and minds, it was part of the strategic campaign, but it really was only the objective of the campaign. And so I just put it in the victory conditions and left it out basically completely. And you have to, as the player, pick it up by figuring it out. Wait a moment. It says that for every town I get 400 guys in, it's a victory. It's a victory point. And so, different levels at those 3 levels. The hearts and mind, is it the simplest level in this game? The command, is it a mid or a slightly above? And the river crossing is on steroids, just like crazy.
The one other Washington's Crossing thing I wanted to specifically touch on before we go a little wider, you mentioned a little bit earlier of how asymmetric this is and how different these sides are to play. Did it fully start that way, or did that come out more as you refined the design? How did you wind up with where it landed in terms of the asymmetry of the sides?
It got that way during the research stage.
Okay.
Where you're taking notes of what they did, and you make a daily log of where they go. You play it as a map exercise to see what the historical people did. And that starts to lead you to understanding why they maneuver, from a combination of what they said of why they did things, and also then studying it on the map. That's something I don't think wargamers really understand how different that is than most historical writing. And I'll give an example. In Washington's Crossing, the book, David Hackett Fisher would kill me in terms of his ability at research, historical writing, and everything else. But he isn't making a model of the game.
Right. Yeah.
So in a model of the game, moving around and having to make rules that make sense makes you think about history in a different fashion than a historian.
Absolutely.
So he's got a section after the battle where he's talking about the moves of the army. And it's all based on historical orders and everything else. But at one point, I'm mapping it out, and it doesn't make any sense. The British Army jumps over a town, then it goes backwards 20 miles, then it goes forward, jumping past that point. I can see that what has happened is he's got the sequence wrong. And the sequence isn't wrong because Fisher made a mistake. The sequence is wrong because, and these guys did it, and he caught it several other times. They've got the dates wrong in their letters or their diaries or whatever else. But it's really obvious to me as a wargamer because they could never have moved that. It's at too long a march for one day, and then it goes backwards, and then it goes forward, and it just shows up when you're saying no wargamer would ever do that. So it starts in the research phase, and you start going, oh, look at the patterns that I'm seeing. Oh, it's always the British chasing the Americans. The Americans are averaging. I counted out all the marches. Oh, look at this. The Americans have a higher average daily march. So it's research that drove the asymmetric nature.
For sure. And you mentioned a bit, so moving to some broader things, you mentioned a little bit earlier with this that you at least you had an idea of making this into more of a series or applying things from this to other AmRev conflicts. What's the status of that? Have you done anything further on that? Or?
So I started work on a second one, which would have been the Monmouth campaign, and the game just didn't sell well enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
Washington's Crossing took 3 years to just break even. And in the wargame publishing world, that's way too slow. You can't have your return on investment just to break even, not to mention pay me anything for effort that's too slow. And so, and it sold out its original run like last year. And that was like, 14 years to sell out a first printing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the game. I really like my own game. But the business part of me just goes, that's not practical. So that serious, that complicated, that much record keeping of an American Revolution game, I've just decided not going to make it as a commercial project. So I don't think there'll ever be another one in that series.
Well, that's unfortunate to hear, certainly for the people who like this one. How much do you think is there anything there of it's not what people expect from Revolution, with Revolution having this real great reputation for World War II, Civil War, later conflicts, or is it just that it's hard to sell American Revolution games?
So American Revolution is not a terrible subject. I'll be interested in hearing like Gene's opinion on it.
Yeah.
My opinion is obviously it's not World War II. It's not Napoleonics. Those would be the top two. Modern stuff, if well chosen, can be really good. I'm not certain it's any worse than like Ancients, for example. So, I mean, it's not top, but I think there's a couple of things. Operational games have never been as popular. If you want to sell games, make a tactical game.
Sure.
Number one, tactical games outsell all others. An operational game is a smaller market to start with. So I did a smaller market, operational games on a smaller subject, American Revolution. So there's a dual fault there. And then I did it with a brand new company.
Yeah.
That almost nobody remembered. It'd been 20 years since I had designed my last game. So I'm carrying almost no reputation forward. So in terms of those three things, Washington's Crossing had a really hard, had a hard row. And to give some difference, the next game, sold really well right from the beginning. It's Battle of the Bulge.
Sure. Yeah.
It's small. It's easy to get into. Washington's Crossing has sold like 1,200 copies its whole career.
Sure.
Sells, counting translations in other languages, is at 4,800.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. We're not GMT here. So divide everything by a healthy dose here. But still, it's 4 times the game that would be. And then if we go over to something like our Stalingrad game, which is our solo area impulse that Mike Ranella does, we have a partnership with Mike and his company, Take Aim Designs. We sold 2,000 of those in 9 months, and we've just reprinted it the 3rd time.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool.
So solo games increase your sales substantially, or a game that has a solo bot in addition to 2-player game. And then Stalingrad is, of course, one of the iconic games of all time.
Yeah.
And then it's a good game. You have to have those other things. Don't matter if you just screw it all up. You have to have a good game. But we'll probably sell 5,000 of those by the end of this year. And there's just no comparison. So unfortunately, from a business standpoint of view, and we don't produce everything from just the business point. There's a lot of our games that are on it that are lesser subjects and more obscure stuff, but it is a consideration.
No, that makes complete sense for sure. I mean, you are running a business. So we're coming to the end of our time here with Roger. Again, if anyone watching this does have questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll pull them up. But just a couple more for you, Roger. So maybe you can mention a little bit about how Revolution has grown in the time since you did Washington's Crossing. How has that journey been?
We're probably the smallest company that functions like a big company, is the best way I can talk about that. Meaning that we use first-rate artists like Charlie Kibler, does our counters, blah, blah, blah. The plant we print at is the same plant that other people print at. So the boxes will look surprisingly familiar to people who really look. The counters will look a lot like other people's counters. Many of the designers have worked at, other companies. So right now we're working with Herman Luttman on a new Leipzig game, which is behind me on the table here. And obviously, Herman's done many games with GMT and everybody else. And so we pretty much function like the large company, but everything is at, a smaller level. So we only average like 3 games a year in terms of what we produce. And that's because Richard, my partner, and I, we're a 2-person company, really. And I'm the primary developer of that 2-person company.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that Leipzig game right now, we're playing 5 days a week.
Right, sure.
And we're taking notes. It doesn't mean other people haven't play tested it. But the Revolution game system is it goes through us. We do artwork early, unusually.
Mm-hmm.
We do artwork at the beginning. We want to play with finished artwork as long as you can. And I pay artists to do revisions rather than do it the other way around. I also got tired of simply making playtest counters. I'm a lazy SOB, and I said I'm not going to keep doing this. So I have the counters done early, the map done early. That will be run through playtesting with outside testers. And then it will come to Revolution Games, and it will get 3, 4, 5 months of intense work in-house. And that's the way our system works. But that limits us to 2 to 4 games a year. That's going to be the limit. 2, if we were going to say on average, we're like GMT might have a print run average of between 3,000 and 5,000 copies on a game. We're going to be 1,500 to 2,500, say roughly half what GMT would be doing. And that's not that far off what, say, Compass or Multiman would be doing. But that's the kind of run we're talking in terms of ours. We expect to, on a title-by-title basis, maybe be half the average of, say, those three companies put together, or throw Decision in there also. I think Decision, Compass, and Multiman are all pretty close.
For sure. Well, I mean, you're certainly doing a lot of cool stuff. I loved seeing what you guys brought with Shiloh the first day at SDHistCon in San Diego recently. It was great to see that there. And the one I was going to ask you that you just a little more about you that you just came out with, Early Frettons Washington. That's to me, that's a really cool subject. I just finished reading a couple of books about that campaign. So, what more can you tell us about that one?
So that was a case where the designer chose the subject. It's nothing for me. So that series, that Civil War series, Herman has given us the permission that anybody can design a game in that system. So quite a few people then come to us and say, hey, I'd like to do a game on this subject or that subject. And that subject has been done a few times by Multiman once, by SBI years ago. It's a marginal subject. It's not an obvious yes or no for Civil War.
Sure.
So the designer, though, wanted to do it. And fortunately for me, he lives close enough to me. He's which is rare. He lives within a couple hours of me, and we could actually get together and play it. And so he sold me, and the main thing that sold me was the situation. And it's a river crossing.
There you go. Bringing it all back.
It's a river crossing situation, and there's multiple crossing locations.
Yeah.
And it very much reminded me of Washington's Crossing. They both have Washington in the name, and it had some of that same maneuvering. And so you had to choose where to defend and where to attack. And I found that interesting, and more interesting than the standard line-it-up battle across a battlefield. The terrain is the most interesting thing in Early Threatens Washington. And I like games that the terrain is the star. And so Prelude to Vicksburg is very much the same way in the Civil War series. It's a horrible swamp that you're fighting in, and the special rules and fighting in that, and you'll just go, well, no wonder they got nowhere against the Confederates in this situation. So, after having played for 50 years, I'm looking for some interesting situations, and I found it an interesting situation. So I don't expect it to be as, the greatest seller, but it's an okay subject. And it's been up for sale now for a little over a week, and it's doing fine. It's doing right where I expected it would be.
Well, that's awesome. That's good to hear. And we appreciate that you brought that terrain-focused approach of Washington's Crossing, and we very much appreciate you contributing to our SDHistCon here. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Roger, on Washington's Crossing or Revolution in general before we wrap up?
Well, no, but if there's anybody who hasn't heard, Early Threatens Washington, the latest Blind Sword game, just came out. Also, Tank Schlacht, which is the successor to Death of an Army by Carey. It's World War I. It's the Battle of Cambrai. So those two just came out, and we're working on the big Leipzig game, which will be Blind Swords adjacent. I mean, it's not the same system. It's not exactly the Black Swan system either. It's its own neat thing. And we're working on the reprint of the Civil War from Victory Games.
Yes,
and
right.
In Tempe, we will have the Civil War and the Leipzig game available for play and seeing, and both of those are well along. And we'll also have a Wagram game that's a little not quite as far along, but it'll be available for seeing. So if you are going to Tempe, come by, see the stuff. And if you don't know, we have new stuff out, and all the old stuff is on sale also, and a good sale right now. Go to revolutiongames.us and take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure to drop that link both in the comments here after this and also in the Discord on the AmRev server. Well, thank you once again, Roger. We really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you very much.